Hey everyone, this is Baylor, and in this video, we're going to focus more on creating migrations in Rails. So I kind of covered that very briefly in the last video, and after talking to a friend, he mentioned that he was more interested in trying to see in depth how you do this in Rails, and it kind of crossed my mind that this is actually an important topic because you can focus on controllers and views inside of an MVC application, but really everything goes through models, right? I mean, and so it's very important that you get your schema correct. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to get it as close to perfect so you don't have to make drastic changes later on. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. So we're going to learn how migrations work in more depth. So what we're going to do is first, let's just see, like last time I was doing the actual somewhat scaffolding where we created a model and a migration at the same time. What if we just want to focus on just migrations? That's what we're going to do initially. So Rails is pretty smart. We can do Rails generate migration, and we're going to create a product. And so we can just say something like create products here. And what Rails is going to do is it realizes our verb is create. And so it's going to look and see what we name this afterwards, like what's after the underscore. And you can do it Pascal case like this, create products. Those are equivalent. And so when we run this and we take a look inside of that migration, you can see that it defined a Ruby class that has a single method named change. And inside of there, it says we're going to create a table named products. Now, what's significant about this is we just start at the top where we have change. What this means is migrations can go forward and they can go backwards. So going forward, it is going to create this table products. When we go backwards or when we roll back, it's going to drop this table products. And so this is a pretty cool thing in Rails is that it understands the verbs as far as change here to allow both forward and back, and understands the opposite of create is drop. And so most of the time in Rails, you can get by with creating migrations by simply saying define change, and because you're going to say create table or add column or add index, add foreign key, things like that. And Rails understands that going forward we create or we add, going backwards we drop or we remove. So that's a significant thing in itself. Now, if you have something where you're saying like alter column, right? And that means you're going to make a change. So you're going to go from maybe like a varchar 150 to a varchar 200. Then you'll need to do what is called up and down. And so you define a method up that creates and define down. And here we would say drop table products like that. And so if you have to do an alter, most of the time you'll end up doing up and down manually. But 90% of the time you can simply get by with just defining your change. And so, and I guess I'll cover real quick, this is not something you do too often, but you might say that I create a table of products and I can't roll back from this. And so if you do that inside your down method, you would say raise active record irreversible migration. And so what happens here is I go forward, create the table. When I try to go backwards, Rails says can't do this, and it raises this exception or this error, letting you know that you can't go back from what you've just done. So those are just some few things. Now, what we're going to do is, this doesn't tell us anything about products, right? And you can write these by hand. You could say like, I want to have a column, I want to have an index, right? You can do these by hand, but there's a better way to do that. So what I'm going to do real quick is we want to undo this migration. And the easiest way to do that is if we go back to this command that we wrote, Rails G migration. If we say Rails D, if we say Rails D migration, this is delete this this migration basically. And so Rails is really smart and says, okay, we're going to look for the migration name create products. We don't care about the timestamp. We figured that out, and then we just delete this whole file. And you can do that for a lot of things. Like you could say Rails generate controller foo, and then you see this defines a lot, right? And then you could say Rails Rails D controller foo, and it removes everything. So very cool stuff. So let's get back to it. we want to say Rails generate migration, create products. Our product's going to have a title. It's going to have a price. Now here's what we can specify an option. So what I missed is by default, this is the equivalent of saying title :string if I don't add that. And that just means that we want to have a varchar of some value, for some length. But price, we don't want that to be a string or a text type. We want this to be a decimal. And we can pass in our options with curly braces. We can say like 15:2. And so that's going to make our precision on our scale 15:2. And then we can also add our description, and we're going to specify the type for description is text, because a description has more length or more text generally added to it than a title. So if we create that, and now we go and take a look at it, you can see I got my options right. So we're wrong. We're going to undo that one. So we'll say Rails D, and I might need to actually wrap that in quotes. So let's take a look at it now. There we go. So my mistake. Sometimes I can get by with wrapping in quotes, and sometimes I can't. And I think maybe the comment threw it off. But so here we've created our table. It's in our change method, and we're going to add a string title. We're going to say this has a limit of 150 characters, and will be null false. We're going to say our price is going to be null false as well. It defaults to 0. In description, we're not going to do anything. We don't care about that. Now, what we could also do, we could add an index to our title here and say t index, our title, and we want this to be unique true. And so what this will do is when we're creating this table products, we're going to add these 3 columns, and we're also going to have a unique index on title so that this should be more of a constraint, but it is also called an index. And we're going to say that you can't have 2 titles with the same name. And the last thing we can do here is we can say t.timestamps. What this will do is it's going to create 2 columns. It's going to have a created at column and an updated at column. And both of these are going to be date timed, and they default to whenever you create it, and when you make changes to a record, it'll automatically update the updated at. So that's a good thing to have as well. And for that reason, I'll push my index to the end because these are 2 columns. So now that we've defined this migration, we can migrate our database. So I'm going to run Rails DB create, and so that's going to create my database because I dropped it, and that's necessary. And then we'll say migrate, and what it's going to do is, in this case, we've never run a migration, so it's going to see that. It's going to run our create products migration. And now we can take a look at this. So Rails has a DB console command, and this is the equivalent of like writing PSQL shopper _ development to connect to that. And if I remember correctly, it's /d products. And so this is our Postgres way of saying, what does this table schema look like? So our products table has an ID. It makes it a big int. It's not null. It will auto increment. It also has an index for our primary key. You can see we have our title. It's a character limit varchar of 150. We have our price, which is a numeric 15:2, and we have our 2 timestamps. Everything that we specified null false, these default to null false. And then you can see it named our index smartly. So it's added index to products on title, and it's unique. So if we kind of overlay that, I'll just grab all this out. Okay, there we go. I couldn't remember the Ruby multi-line comments. So you can see how these overlay together. So we had a string title with a limit of 150. So it added a column title with a limit of 150, not null because we said null false. We have a decimal here. Rails migrations figure out that I'm not a database guy at a large level. I know decimal exists in like MS SQL. My guess now is in Postgres that's considered numeric with the same precision and scale of 15:2. null false, null false. I don't see, oh, default, that should have been, should have had a singular default. So let's actually, we'll just Rails, so to undo that, what we can actually do is this. Let's go back into this. I'm going to edit this migration, right? I'm making a change here, saving it. And then what I'm going to do is say Rails DB migrate redo. And what that'll do is it's going to redo the migration we just ran. So you can see it reverted it and then it migrated it back forward. So that's pretty cool. And so now if we go into our DB console, you can see now our price has the default of 0. So when you make mistakes like that, you don't have to roll back and by hand, you can just say redo. And that's interesting because this redo command has a step like this. And so you could say step 5 or whatever it is, and that'll redo like the last 5 migrations. So if you need to make a change a couple migrations back, you can do that without having to roll back by hand. So that's our products. This is, and what's also neat here, if we look at this, there's actually 2 files that have changed. We have that migration file. We also have a DB schema RB. And what this is it is a Ruby implementation of our database schema. And so you can basically see it defines a schema version that's the equivalent of our latest migration that's been run. And then you can see it's defined that we create a table products. Force cascade means that if we drop from products, we drop from tables that have that reference. And then you can see that we have all our columns that we defined. It always emits the ID, and you may have noticed that ID was not in our migration file either. It's just kind of a given. And then you can see here we have our 2 timestamps that came from the timestamps and our index defined here. Now, what's neat about this file is this is used for version control. So it kind of gives you, if there's a merge conflict in this file, you know there's a migration that needs to be rerun, or we might need to make some changes to how our migrations are being run. And so we can commit this. We can say that we have added our create a products table. Now, what do we do when we want to add a model? Because this alone doesn't give, like if we try to go into Rails console here, which is a way for us to play with our data, our Rails application without having to go through controllers and actual HTTP requests. We could, if we try to access product here, you know, the class doesn't exist, or the constant product is not there. And so to create that, we can run Rails generate model product, and that's enough to get us going. You can see this also wanted to create a migration, realizes it already existed, so it just skipped it. I think it skipped it, or maybe I have to force, okay, we have to tell it to skip. Okay, so that created our model. If we look at that, you can see it's just an empty class. And Rails does this. Rails doesn't, like if you don't have to define, like we have an adder accessor for our title and description and all that. You can, Rails does that in the background for you with, I assume, method missings. So what happens is, now if I say product, it realizes that product exists, and we can do things like product.first, and you can see now it's trying to query our products table. How do we, if we, like we created a migration separately, and I will just say we've add our product model. How do we, if we wanted to do both steps in one, how do we do that? And well, we can run that same command, Rails generate model, but this time we can, let's do like categories. So we'll have products have many categories and so on and so forth. So we'll say generate a model category, and this time we're just going to have our title. And so when we generate a model, we can also specify the columns that we want to add to that record as well. And this also does a little bit more. So if we look at create categories here, you can see it created same migration, change, create table. It added our column title, but it also went ahead and added our timestamps. It knows this is more than just a simple table. This is actually a model. We want to have the timestamps associated with that. So here we can also specify things like this is not null, and we can add an index to our title as well, and we'll say this is unique. So now if we run Rails DB migrate, you're going to see that it creates our new categories table. And if we also take a look, we can do this. You can see, oh, my mistake, I need to put that here. You can see that it created our category Ruby file as well. And so now if we go back into Rails console, we can say like category.first, and you can see now it's trying to load our categories. So that does 2 steps in one. So what do we do now if we want to make a change? So the change here is that if we look at our schema for categories, you see there's no limit to the title, the length on title. And so this is going to use up too much space in our database because we do need this to have a length, and so, or a maximum length. And so what we can do here is we can say Rails generate migration, and we're going to say that we want to change the title length on, and here we're going to say categories. Now, what happens here is Rails is going to see that we have the change verb here, and then it's going to know that we're saying on our categories table. So if we come into here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to have a separate up and down methods. And so we're going to say on up, we want to alter the column for categories title, and we're going to say this is a string type, and we want to have a limit of, let's say, 100 characters for the categories. And then when we come back down, what we'll actually do is, because technically this would cause a problem. Well, no, it wouldn't. We're going if we were making this shorter than we were, but this would actually make the length unlimited. So we're just going to leave it here and to say that on up, we're going to add a limit to 100. On down, we're going to take that away. And so now if we run our migration, it'll give us an error. Alter column. Oh, it's probably change column. And now let's run that migration again. There we go. So change column, not alter column. My mistake. And so it even outputs that the option here is set to a limit of 100. And so now if we go and look at our schema file, we'll actually see that on categories we have a limit of 100. So I think this covers it because we ran Rails generate model, so that before, so we already have our Ruby file for this. And so I think that's everything that I want to focus on here. I guess, well, there's one more. What we want to look at now is we've created our categories, we've created our products. How do we link those together? Because there's going to be a many-to-many. A category can have many products. Likewise, a product can belong to many categories or have many categories. So what we can do for that is we're going to generate a new model, and we're going to call it product categories. And I'm going to actually name the singular, so product category. And we're going to say this has a product that it belongs to, and there's going to be a category this belongs to. So if you're familiar with junction tables or join tables, you know that when you create a join, when you want to have a many-to-many, you create a table that lives in between those two that has a foreign key that goes to both sides. And so this will create that for us. It creates this, and if we take a look at this, this new migration, we need to add a foreign key to this one as well. I don't know what I did to miss that. Oh, I just said belongs to, or belongs instead of belongs to. My mistake. So we want to add both of these. We're creating this table. We're creating this, and this is a magical type when we say belongs to. And we also have the ability to say we want to have a foreign key constraint as well. And I'm also going to tell this to not be null because it's required that when we push into this table that we can't put in a null category ID or a null product ID. And that's what this will create. Belongs to will create a column that's like product ID with the type of big int and not null. And I'll do the same down here. And my mistake. Wow, I got that backwards. And then with the foreign key, because I can't remember the exact syntax for writing foreign key constraint. So we won't do that. We let Rails do it for us because That's what makes Rails so great, is we don't have to know that in Postgres this is how you write a foreign key constraint, and this is how you do it in MS SQL or MySQL or SQLite, whatever. You don't have to know that because Rails takes care of that under the hood for you when you just say this has a foreign key of true. So there we go. My example is I make a mistake and I don't have to think about that I made a mistake or worry about it, at least because I trust that you haven't judged me too much. So now we run Rails daemon migrate. It's going to run that create product categories migration. And if we just hop into our DB console here, we can go into look at that. And you can see this has the product ID, a big int, not null, category ID, not null. And we have our foreign key constraints that go, and I did not realize it generated a random. Well, I knew it generated something random, but I thought it was going to at least try to be a little bit smart. Let's rename that because this is bad. Because if you hand this to a DBA, what happens is every environment potentially will have a different foreign key constraint name, which is bad. Because being this is kind of like a GUID, even though it's probably not a GUID. What would happen is that if you ran something locally, say I want to remove this foreign key constraint, when it goes up to the other environment, that might not necessarily exist. So to fix that, what we can do is we're just going to come into, well, I don't know if we can do that here. Let's try it. There's a name option that you can pass if you say add foreign key. And in fact, maybe we'll just do that. Maybe we'll take that out here. And so we're going to, after I create our table, we're going to say add foreign, key. We're going to go for product categories. And we're going to say to product. And we're going to set the name of this to be FK product categories to products. And we'll do the same thing here to categories and to categories. And we'll run Rails DB migrate redo. And this caused an error. So this is kind of what I was talking about, that it's trying to drop this foreign key constraint. And it's not named. So let's see if we can roll back without having to do too much, because I've already kind of demonstrated this doesn't work. Okay. What I shall do is this. How will I get around this? I guess I could just define a down method. And I'm going to literally just copy this down here and put in foreign key true. And we're going to say migrate redo, and hopefully this will work. Did not. Oh, I need to say drop table thing. Let's try this. There we go. Okay, so now if we take a look at this, you can see now we have a named foreign key constraint that makes sense here. So because this to me is kind of an important thing. I mean, it does that here. It's very smart here that says we're adding an index to product categories on category ID. Likewise, we're doing another one on product ID. I wish the foreign keys generated smarter names as well, but alas, they do not. And so thankfully, I'm here to save the day as a human being that's working on this project. So we'll commit this first one and say we add categories. And now we'll do this next one. Now what's neat here is if we go and look at this product category, and outside the typo that I made earlier, this added the actual active record association links here between product and category. And so what I'm going to do is commit this because this, well, I actually kind of feel that maybe it's okay not to. I am going to go and split this, and so here we're going to go into product, and here we're going to go into category. Okay, so we've created our database schema, and if we look at that again just to kind of see this, we have categories, and then we have products, and then we have the piece that links these two together. So it's a join table here, or a junction table, product ID and category ID. In active record, how do we link these two together? Well, what we do is we define our join table has a belongs to attribute here. And we say this belongs to product and category, and that is going to go off of this product categories table has a product ID. Likewise, here it has a category ID, right? So that's how that works. How do we link these two together? So how do we go from product to categories? Well, what we do is we say we have many or has many, and we say product categories. And so this is going to look and say, okay, we need to create a join table, or a join rather, we're in SQL. We need to create a join to product categories. And it's smart enough here to say that we're going to, it's basically going to write like on product.id, or I guess this is plural, equals our product categories dot product ID, right? So that's what that's going to do when we say has many. And then what we do is we say we have many or has many categories. And we say we have these through our product categories. And what this will do, so you remember we had our join table here. Here, what it'll do is it's going to say that, or this is a join, like it's either a left join or inner join. It's probably an inner join. Product categories. So then we're going to have here, so I'll just move that up. Okay, I feel like this is the easier way to see it. You can kind of already see the SQL that's being generated here before we actually just run it and have, anyways, whatever. So we have many product categories here. That's a SQL that it creates. When we run this one, we're going to say it's going to inner join onto categories on, and here we're going to say where the category ID equals our product categories dot category ID. Now what's really cool about this is this is going to work because it's already said only find product categories where the product matches the current ID. Likewise, then we can say now find the categories where, going off of this already created join, where the category ID matches the category ID. So it's very cool how this ends up working. And you can see the syntax is very small. And it can be copied over to our category model here. We're just going to say we're going from product categories down to products. So let's go ahead and utilize this. Let's play around with some active record stuff. I'm not going to talk anymore about migrations and models. Unless you have any questions, please leave them and I'll make a video to talk about it in more depth. So real quick, we'll commit this and say that we add join table between product. Oh, that's going to be too long. Add join between products and categories. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go into our Rails console. We're going to play around a little bit. So we're going to say product equals product.new. And so that gives us our product, or I named it P. I usually do that. And so we'll say our title here is going to be Rubik's Cube. And we'll set the price here to $15.99. My mistake. Equals. And the description equals 3x3 cube, or Diane. Oh no, I've done this. Zanchi. Is that how you spell Zanchi? I think so, but it's probably wrong. I can't remember. Okay, well, if you know that, you can just ignore it, and if you don't, you can say, wow, Miller knows how to spell Diane Zanchi, and just go on from there. Okay, so that gives us our product. If we ask, like this is active record stuff, we say like product.save or new record, it's going to say true, right? And the opposite of that is persisted. And yes, I did. Thank you. And so here we can say like, it hasn't been saved. It is a new record. It's true. Persisted is the opposite of new record. It's like saying if, not new record, whatever. So we can ask questions like that while we're doing this. We know it's a new record. And we can go ahead and say we want to create a category. Now, this is where active record is just unbelievably awesome. So if we ask, like, what are our categories here? It's going to say, well, we don't have any categories, right? It's an empty association. So what we can do is we can say, like, this is going to be some Ruby syntax here. We can say we have this categories association, and I want to shovel on a new category, right? So I can say category.new, and here I know category only has a title. So I'm just going to say the title here is going to be toys, puzzles. And so what happens here is now if we look at our categories on product, it brings back that we have a new category, and it assigned the title here, but it is not created, right? It's new. But when we say p.save, you can see what it did is it starts a transaction. And that means like if we insert these two and it works, but this failed, it won't leave these two hanging in the database. It'll roll back everything. And so, and we'll play with that in a second, but you can see it inserted into products, created the category, and then it found the two IDs that we just created, and it created that association. So what that means, if I say P2 equals product.find, and we can see that this had an ID of 1, product ID is 1. So if I say product find 1, you can see that P2 is now, we loaded that product, and I can say P2.categories.first. You can see this is going to say, go to categories, join on the product categories, and find that category ID, and where the product category's product ID equals the product ID we pass in. Now this is really cool because it only did one join. It joined directly on the categories, and then in our where we say where the product ID equals. So Rails is doing some very cool things here with some very small syntax. We just said find this product by ID and give me the first category. And you can see it also did a limit here. So it's very smart at what it's doing. Now first, before we close this, we're going to play with this and actually cause this to fail. Now I didn't add any validation to our model. Maybe I'll talk about that in the future. But we do have our database constraints where we can't insert a null title. So let's play with that real quick. So we'll say p3 equals product.new. p3.price equals $5. p3.description equals the greatest toy soldier of all time. And p3 categories. And I'm going to actually do this a little bit differently. I apologize. But I'm going to insert into our categories, right? We're going to shovel category.new and say toys. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not specify a title. Right. There we go. So, oh, and I did that wrong. Wow. p3.categories equals category.new. Like this. Okay, so now if we look at P3 categories, we only have a single category with no title. And title is the required. We have a not null there. And for the product, I'm going to say P3.title equals G.I. Joe. I never played with action figures when I was a child. So I think that's correct. Okay, so if we look at P3, you can see that we have our title, we have our price, we have our description. The product is correct. It's the category that's wrong because this has a null title. So when we say p3.save, you can see what it did is it inserts into products. It tries to insert into categories, but because this failed, it rolled back. And so now if we try to look at like, if we did a roll query, it's like product.count, there's only one, right? That's the cool thing about Rails is it wrapped that in a transaction and it rolled it back immediately. And it raised our error here to say that we had a not null violation. And so the next video, we'll probably look at validations on models because those are very cool things. And that allows us to say like p3.valid, right? And it's valid here, but our category is not valid. And that kind of thing would come up here and we could say, well, give me the errors. And it would say, well, the category doesn't have a title and things like that. So we'll play with that in the next video. Thank you for watching it. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll answer it either by text or a video if that makes sense. And so I'll see you next time. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. And just like that, this video is over and I'm out.